So let us begin. Good day, dear colleagues. We welcome everyone at the briefing and presentation, during which Naftogaz will present the results of the work of the group for 2020. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions of the lockdown, the press conference will be held online in the format of Zoom, though, of course, we would be happy to see all of you personally. In a nutshell, some of the rules of today's event. The length of our briefing is up to an hour and a half. First, we'll listen to the speakers, and then the journalists will pose their questions. I'm driving your attention. We have two languages in this event, and in the Zoom to the bottom, to the right, you can choose the language which you need. If you're an English-speaking journalist or speaker, you should choose English channel and don't change it. But if you're a Ukrainian language speaking and you would like to listen everything in Ukraine, choose Ukrainian and don't change it during the event. We are broadcast live in Facebook, in Naftogaz group and the divisions, but it is done in the original language only, the language of the speakers. After the event, we'll definitely make public both Ukrainian language and English language videos in the YouTube of the group. I will mention that in the Zoom we have the participants of the group of Naftogaz and the journalists, but also we have the representatives of Naftogaz in Zoom, in particular the supervisory board, the heads of the departments. So there is a request to the journalists, do not pose questions for them, they are here just like listeners. So now I can introduce our today's speakers. We've got 5 of them. That is Andrei Kobolev, the head of the board of NAK Naftogaz Ukraine, Otto Vaterlander, the main executive director of Naftogaz Group, Peter Van Driel, the financial director of Naftogaz Group, Sergei Pereloma, first deputy head of the board of NAK Naftogaz Ukraine, and Yaroslav Teklyuk, director on legal issues of NAK Naftogaz Ukraine. So I give the floor to Mr. Andrei now, who, in fact, will begin the speech about the main achievements of the group for the last year. Hello, dear colleagues. I thank you that you joined us and that you pay attention to our results. Finally, I would like to dot all the I's and provide the real figures which reflect our real results during the previous year. Those figures are supported by the auditors and approved all the indicators, so the head of the financial department will comment on that as well. I would like to give the introduction speech, which could explain the overall picture, the main factors which impacted this picture, and also would provide several ideas about our future actions, how we can see the solution of certain problems which have become obvious in 2020. 2020 was a crisis year, of course, and everybody understands that. Globally, Naftogaz and oil and gas industry, in the majority of cases, as they say, is in the red zone of negative outcomes and results. Those negative results, of course, did not avoid the Ukrainian market of natural gas. We could see the record of the low prices because the price for during the summer could go down together with the GDP to the level which was lower than 2,700 hryvnia for a cubic meter, which is really low in comparison with the previous years. The prices at the European markets were super low as well, and the overall economic crisis, among all the rest, impacted the consumption volume of the gas and the ability of the consumers to pay for gas. As for the consumers' ability to pay for gas, for the natural gas they consumed, it was, I would say, a kind of a substantial impact, but totally obvious impact factor as for the outcomes of the previous financial year. The thing which we and our supervisory board and lots of other consumers were speaking about during the previous 6 years since the moment of the implementation of PSO, that's what happened. The private companies, which according to the acting framework were implemented by the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, so-called PSO, just stopped paying us after the finalizing of the PSO as it is. And it's important to mention here that I consider and I insist that the decision to stop PSO is totally proper and totally correct. Because this government, the Prime Minister, Mr. Shmigal, had enough courage to say that the black is the black, the white is the white, that this mechanism lost its abilities and we had to stop it. The later we did it, the more money we could lose. So Denis Shmigal has summed up the 6 years of artificial mechanism when the private intermediaries had access to the resource of the natural gas of Naftogaz Ukraine, and this resource of the natural gas was used, I would say, non-transparently, because we still haven't got the results of all of the audits, why this debt is so big and how this indebtedness is really the blame of the state, whether it's not economically efficient. But the fact is the fact. For more than 20 billion hryvnia of indebtment of private gas companies were totally not used because the payments totally stopped. And just to await that they will come back, well, we consider it's not reasonable. And the third important aspect which really impacted our activity the previous year with the group of Naftogaz Ukraine, we had the exit of the most profitable segment of activities historically, that is the segment of gas transmission and transportation, which includes gas transit. After the unbundling process, this segment is now working at the separate independent operator, and the profits are staying there and don't impact the financial outcomes of NAK Naftogaz. Maybe they will impact this year after we implement the deal about the sales of the shares to this company between us and the other companies, but so far we don't have the proper understanding how it can be done. There were debates, but last year this exit took place. So, concluding, the outcomes of 2020, the pure consolidated loss is 19 million hryvnia. This is the first indicator during the last year, 19 billion since 2015. It's the biggest one, but we may say we should mention the big difference between 2014, when we had the record loss and expenses, and the situation in 2020. In 2020, our payments to the budget were 141 billion hryvnia, pure transfers from the budget. If we calculate the paid sums for by the government, was more than 100 billion. The profit of the usual activity was 3.2 billion hryvnia, and in fact, during such a complicated year, the revenue from the usual activity of the group, if we compare the same segments which the group still has after the unbundling, has grown. And of course, we are not the only company which documented expenses and losses, but what we are really proud of is that, looking at the crisis and seeing the droppage of the prices and the negative effects of 19.9 billion hryvnia, the positive effect of the anti-crisis plan, which will be spoken more by our operational director, Mr. Otto Vatolander, was improved for 12.6 billion hryvnia. Those are the results which we really are proud of. In my real persuasion, it is the best witness of that we've chosen several years ago, the operational model which is implemented during the transformation, which was constructed at the new approach and new managerial principles. It is really working. And also, I would like to compare us and to respond for certain criticism from our opponents, like such a big company, what is ongoing. We can be compared with anybody in our country considering our efficiency, but there is one figure which I'm really proud of. As of the end of the previous year, the level of money at our accounts was close to 50 billion hryvnia. During the first quarter of this year, the level of those accounts has grown for more than 10 billion hryvnia. We're expecting the revenue from our usual activities or operational activities during the first quarter of this year. Well, I can't say because we don't see the Eurobonds, but still, it is very substantial. And I consider that 2020 was the year when we were honestly acknowledging the issues together with the government, which were piled up during the previous period. We assessed its impact onto the financial results of the company, and thanks God that this impact was not transformed into the financial mostly, because our accounts again approve our activities in the first quarter, that the company is now generating money, or at least began to generate the revenues, and provided the foundation for the efficient work for the future. As of now, I'd like to stop and to give the floor to the next speaker, and in the end we'll come back again to the detailed questions and explanations. Thank you. Mr. Peter, the floor is yours.
Good. Thank you, André. Good afternoon. My name is Peter van Driel. In Nafta, I'm the Chief Financial Officer, and I'm delighted today to give you an insight in our performance for year 2020. Let's go to the first slide. In one slide, you see what 2020 in terms of financials actually has meant for us. And some of the numbers we already shared with you, but I want to show you basically on the bottom left what happened in the oil and gas industry worldwide. And you can see it is not a very favorable picture. You see the prices coming down in a dramatic way. And you've seen also, probably in the news, that other major oil and gas companies struggled in this environment. An environment in which demand for energy was lower. And as a consequence, the prices for all energy products, but including gas, came down in 2020. And you see how much the decrease of the gas price was in 2020 compared to the previous year of 2019. And we're talking about nearly 40% here, 40% lower prices. So let me give you a bit more insights, a little bit more detail on what actually happened in 2020. And can we please go to the next slide? So let me first explain to you that you see the profitability of the Naftagaz Group on the left-hand side, which was 2.6 billion. And what we do in this graph, we take out the transmission business and the contribution that we received after we made a huge success. And that is the Gazprom award that we received in 2019. We take it out to give you a like-for-like comparison between what happened in 2019 and what happened in year 2020. And if we go from left to right, you will see that the impact of a lower demand for energy, lower gas prices, actually had a huge impact on our profitability. You can see that that was nearly 12 billion. And when we, at the beginning of the year, as management, noticed that the world around us was severely impacted by the consequences of COVID-19, we took action. We have implemented a crisis response to ensure that Naftagaz is resilient throughout this crisis. And that we did successfully. We were able to offset the impact of the economic crisis through actions of management. An example, we reduced our cost in a dramatic way. Billions of hryvnia of cost were taken out of the system. And if I then look at what remains, is actually a result of 3.2 billion hryvnia. And please remember that the 3.2 billion hryvnia that we achieved in 2020 was actually achieved in a low price environment. So the 3 billion in 2019 was achieved in a much higher price environment. So we took decisive action and we made sure that in a difficult environment, the company is taking action and remains resilient. Now, at the same time, if we go further to the right, we have some unusual items. When I look at the results of the company, I want to understand how our normal operations are doing. And of course, I look at unusual results. The first unusual item was the receipt of the Pso compensation. That was an amount of 32 billion hryvnia. We show you here 26 billion because it's after tax. And you heard before that we pay to the government these taxes. And then we go to the next unusual item. And that is a provision for bad debts. And I'll give you a bit more insights into that on the next slides. And then we had a number of items, legacy items from the past, again, that we label as unusual transactions. And this hopefully will give you an insight in our profitability. And if we look at previous years, Naftagaz has year after year been able to improve its profitability. And that trend continues. If we look at the underlying profit of 3.2 billion, it is another year where we see improvement of our efficiency, but also our effectiveness on how we produce gas. Gas for the benefit of Ukraine. Let's go to the next slide, please. Provisions for bad debt. I don't want to go into too much detail about accounting, but there is a very simple principle. If a customer does not pay, I do not receive any cash, but at the same time, I already have booked the sale. Now, in order then to cancel the sale, I need to make a provision. And why did we have these provisions, large provisions, in 2020? There are two reasons. On the 1st of August of 2020, government made the right choice by abolishing the PSO for the regional gas supply companies, the gasboeties. It means that it is another step in the deregulation of markets. It means a free gas market where consumers have a choice, where consumers can pick their supplier. They have a choice and probably will look at which supplier provides the most attractive offer to them. And that is important. This is how Ukraine is joining the EU in a free gas market. And the good news is that after the 1st of August, everybody started to actually pay for the gas that we were delivering to them. To me, that is the world how it should be. You deliver gas and you get paid. Under the PSO, we never had any instruments to force people to pay. And as a consequence, the Gasbouti had a huge amount of money outstanding on the day that the PSO was abolished. And unfortunately, they have not paid us. And therefore, we need to make provisions. One more time, if people don't pay you, but you book the sale, you need to make a provision, otherwise you would be overinflating your results. And we in Naftagas believe strongly that we should report according to international accounting standards. That is the law, and the law is what we follow. So there's no choice to follow the rules. The rules are set by IFRS, and we follow them, and our accountant then looks, have we followed the rules properly? And in this case, they confirmed what we did was correct, and they signed off on our accounts. The second reason for having provisions for bad debt is actually coming from the heating companies. And this is an area where you see the impact of a difficult economic climate. The reality is that many companies struggled to pay for the gas. So this is slightly different from what I said about the Gasboutis. This is where people want to pay, have the intention, but simply struggle to find the money to pay us. And we will engage with them. We will make arrangements so that ultimately they can pay us. But we have no choice other at the end of 2020 to look at where we are with the payment of gas deliveries. And what we noticed was that amounts are outstanding, and therefore we made a provision for the heating companies of 11 billion. So for the Gasboutis, it was 23. For the heating companies, it was 11 billion hryvnias. And then one more comment maybe, especially on the Gasboutis. Let's not forget that if people don't pay us, Naftagas cannot give money back to the government. And that means that the non-payment ultimately impacts the people of Ukraine. The Gasboutis don't pay us, we cannot pay a dividend to the state, and the state cannot do with the money what they deem to be in the interest of Ukraine. It is a serious issue. And as I said, we follow the law. We're complying with the accounting, but we do regret the fact that people do not honor their payments. Let me go to the next slide. Now, I just spoke about our profits. That is bookkeeping. But what for me always is very important is how we do with our cash. How much money are we making and how much money are we spending? And as a rule, any company that wants to be financially healthy cannot spend more money than what they earn. This is the same for your own household. This is the same for your own wallet. That is how companies stay healthy. And if I look at 2020 and I take out the benefit we had from the Pso compensation, again, I want to understand the real underlying performance of the company, we generated 11 billion hryvnias. Again, in a low price environment. Management then took action, and we looked at what we had in stock, we looked at how much money people owed us, and the amount of money that we owe our suppliers and other providers of goods and services. And we sold a large chunk of our inventories. You see that actually was a benefit of nearly 18 billion. And then we start spending money. A company like Naftagaz constantly needs to spend money on producing gas. Not just gas today, but also production in future years. And in 2020, we've been quite prudent in our capital spending. We carefully looked at, do we really need this service or this good? Can we postpone it to a later date? Or is this proposal in this environment of low prices simply no longer attractive? And that was a key part of our crisis response. So our investments in 2020 were 11.4 billion hryvnias. And then we go to another important milestone that we achieved in 2020. Ultimately, Naftagaz wants to break up Ukr-Nafta. Naftagaz owns 50% and 1 share in Ukr-Nafta. And it's our wish to break up the company, whereby we split the oil and gas assets. But there was one problem. Ukr-Nafta had a huge tax debt. And that tax debt stops us from breaking up the company. So what we did, we paid for gas that we still had to pay them. We even prepaid them gas. And with the money, Ukr-Nafta was able to pay their debt, their tax debt, to the state. This is again a great way to transfer money to the state. And after this deal, you see that we ended the year with 8 billion free cash flow. It means, in very simple terms, we were disciplined. We did not spend more money than what we earned. And that is how it should be. Now, on this graph, I also show you 2019, which is at the bottom. And 2019 was different. Yes, there was more cash generated because the prices were higher. But there was also a lot of purchase of inventories. And we spent 2 times more on investments in 2019 than in 2020. In 2019, we invested 23 billion, and in 2020, we invested 11. You see how much we have reduced our expenditure, our investments. And then on the right, you see that in 2019, more money was spent than what actually was earned. And that is possible for 1 year. Don't get me wrong. But for us, in the long term, we must be financially resilient, and we should not spend more money than what we earn. This is a key point of our crisis response. This is how management reacted to the crisis. Let's go to the next slide. Naftagaz is transparent, and we publish our financial statements, and I invite you to have a look at them. And I just want to share with you how much money we simply have at the end of the year in the bank. And we started 2020 with a high cash balance. Don't forget, we had the Gazprom award. And we paid that money to the state. So effectively, we started the year with 38 billion hryvnia cash in the bank. And then we, as I said before, we earned more money than what we have spent, which is 8 billion hryvnias. Of course, we have to pay for our debt. We have to pay interest. Right? We also benefited from the appreciation of the dollar. And at the end of the year, we had 49 billion hryvnia in the bank. Again, in a low price environment. This is what I mean being financially resilient. Right? You make sure that you take a conservative approach in your financial framework when you have a lot of headwinds, when it's a difficult environment. You do not simply continue to spend. You reduce your cost to be able to be resilient. Let's go to the next slide. More detail, but my point here is very clearly, the money that we received from Gazprom that was awarded to us after we won the arbitration in Stockholm, a major success, we gave all the money to the state. And we've got only two ways to give money to the state. That is by paying tax, and that is by remitting a dividend. But if I then take out that Gazprom award, on the right-hand side, you see actually how strong our cash generation was in 2020. We started with 21.5, and we generated so much money in a difficult environment that we ended the year with nearly 49 billion hryvnia. I hope this gives you an overview of how we have performed in 2020. It was a very challenging year, and there are a number of factors that impact our profitability. A big one is, of course, that some people don't pay their bills, but our underlying profit was quite robust. Our cash generation was quite strong, and that is because we took appropriate action. With that, I would like to hand over to the next speaker, please.
Thank you, Mr. Peter, and now we give the floor to Mr. Otto Vaterlander, Main Executive Director and the Director on Transformation of Naftogaz Group.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join here. I will talk a little bit more about how we achieved the results that André and Peter just went through. Let me first start by saying that the fact that we kept the company financially effective during this crisis is really a sign of teamwork. We managed together a successful anti-crisis plan that allowed us to exceed the production plan, to secure control over our investment base, and ultimately earn more than what we spent. Important for us for the last year is we continued to improve our safety track record. That's where I would like to start. Compared to the year before, we managed to reduce the number of people injuries from 57 to 31. That is not good, but that's a better and an improvement during the crisis year. And we will continue on the journey to improve our safety track record that at the moment stands at par with international companies. We used the crisis as an opportunity to come out stronger. And in particular, our crisis plan called for a stronger focus on business results, and more focus on cash and managing our cash performance. We managed to improve our focus on the business by splitting one of our largest divisions in several. Our integrated gas business, we split into an exploration and production unit, into a commercial unit that then we were able to split further into retail separate from trading. The focus on retail was important because after the abolition of the PSO in the retail market, we really could finally step up our activities to develop a gas retail proposition, a relative new market for us. We had a very small toe in the water, and we had a very ambitious growth plan. We, in the retail market, are a challenger, and we challenged well. We grew in the last year by more than 750,000 customers as an initial base. We have implemented in the retail market innovations. One of the most important innovations was the introduction of a fixed price plan. We offered customers the opportunity to sign in for an annual fixed price tariff. That was such a success that later, as the prices continued to rise, the government decided that a fixed price 12 months plan will become the base, the default proposition for all households in the country. And that's where we are today. Our business focus in upstream was also successful. We exceeded our production plan, even though we reduced our investment levels. In the last year, we brought on board, on stream, 43 new wells, of which 10 more than 100,000 cubic meters per day producing. Very significant wells for us. The reduction of our investments was by looking into the urgency of those investments, revisiting economics of all of our investments, making sure that we would not undertake any uneconomic projects in the environment with significant lower gas prices, and implementing strict cash control among the senior management of the Nafta Gas Group. We also focused on improving our supply chain management. We introduced new practices in procurement that need to get much more traction in this current year, and that have opportunity for us to reduce. But what we already started to do is to change the physical supply chain. And in the physical supply chain, we reduced over 20 warehouses, and we have written down and scrapping off more than 35 rigs, old rigs. And we are able, with our improved drilling performance, to manage our current plan with 20 new rigs, and we have 15 modernized rigs standing by and stepping in from time to time to execute a now further increased activity plan. I mentioned that we came out of the crisis stronger. We delivered strong cash flow. Peter already mentioned the CapEx and OpEx were reduced. The supply chain savings I mentioned, but also we managed to reduce our gas stock and optimized the timing of our sales outside of the summer periods, adding significant to our revenue generation. We strengthened the core of the company, reducing our break-even cost levels. We stabilized nearly our production decline, so we increased by about 2% compared to our plan. Compared to 2019, we were 1% down in volumes. And we also increased the efficiency of our group and reduced the headcount by about 10% in total. We accelerated the transformation of the group. We implemented not only the new operating model, we followed through with a right-sizing effort that achieved this identified headcount reduction. We also managed through a significant crew change in the leadership of the company. And most of our leadership in the exploration and production division has become either replaced or new into this model. And today, our operating model is fully in place, And we are continuing to focus on optimizing the model rather than implementing and designing the model. And maybe most exciting for our employees and for ourselves, and I think for the country, is that we also created a position for long-term production growth. We successfully concluded the negotiations on the 4 production sharing agreements with the government. We acquired all the rights for Yuziska, one of the most significant areas under exploration today. And we acquired all the offshore licenses to start and launch our exploration activities in the Black Sea. We are on track to commencing our seismic activities in the middle of this year. Our retail proposition is a new position, and we completed our strategy, the strategy that identified the gas business as our growth priority, that identified the retail as a new business to create, and that identified our low carbon activities as an important priority to create a new business platform for the future. The ambition in the low carbon entails to build new businesses, but also importantly to achieve carbon neutrality for the group by 2040, or 10 years ahead of the European deadlines. So over the last year, I would like to thank all of our employees working extremely hard to achieve those results and to charge the company into new waters with a strong perspective forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Otto. Our next speaker is Mr. Sergei Pereloma. He is the first deputy of the Board of Directors of NAK Naftogaz Group. Sergei, would you please be very short because we're a bit out of time, unfortunately? I will try. So, hello everybody. If we're speaking about the last year and the results of our work, it would be impossible not to mention the pandemic of COVID-19, and I won't say how it impacted and influenced the outcomes of the business and the financial results. I would like to speak how the group of Naftogaz reacted to those challenges. First of all, I'd like to show the next slide instantly. What did Naftogaz Group do within our group, having the aim to save health and lives of our employees? I would like to remind that Naftogaz, the group of Naftogaz, was one of the first Ukrainian companies who have accordingly responded, developing regulations and methodologies to save our employees. This is, of course, the remote mode of work, which led to the necessity to update the business processes, because lots of them claim continuous production activity. We managed that. We implemented daily monitoring of the health and temperature screenings at the entrances. We provided all the employees with the necessary individual protection means and also disinfection in our premises and transport and other state of the company. And if the person, God forbid, and those were the cases because we're living in the same country, if the person got sick with COVID, we've implemented the daily monitoring of the health state of our people to provide the necessary help if necessary. And also we provided the disinfection frames in the majority of our premises, and they were produced at the enterprises of our group, the group of Naftogaz. So it's our common work. And the next indicator, yes, it is sad, but still it emphasizes that we are moving in the right direction and we are providing something which should be right. Unfortunately, we need to state that altogether in our country, the weighted indicator of lethality is more than 2% if we take the enterprises of the group of Naftogaz without consideration of Ukernafta. That is 0.42%, which emphasizes that we are doing everything right and paying as much efforts as possible to save the health and lives of our employees and counteragents. The next slide, please. But we took care not only about our collective, not only about our employees, we also were playing the role of a very active and socially responsible partner, both for the state of Ukraine and the whole population of our country as it is. You have already heard from the previous speakers how hard and complicated this year was from the perspective of the business, but still the company found the opportunities to spend for the help and assistance and support to counteract against COVID more than 700 million hryvnia. We remember when there were Antares and other aircrafts flying from Hostomel, and they brought the medical equipment and means which was sent to more than 280 hospitals all over Ukraine. The charity assistance to the communities was provided to each fifth community of our country. That is altogether 227 communities. I will remind you that according to the decision of the government, the Naftogaz Group has provided the safety test and exam for the children and other staff which was involved in this process. That is more than 380,000 people who took part in this process. Almost 50 devices of artificial ventilation of lungs was delivered to the 40 hospitals. As for the oxygen, more than 500,000 liters of oxygen was sent all over the country according to the recommendations of the Ministry of Healthcare, and also some assistance was provided to the 19 hospitals, not just for the money which was crowdfunded by the employees who consciously understand that the challenges and there is such a necessity, and they provided such funding for their own account. Remembering about the necessity to keep to the timeline, I will come now to the second part of my presentation, that is the outcomes of the work of the division of natural gas storage and the Ukrtransgaz UTG company. I will remind you that in 2020, since the 1st of January 2020, we already felt the unbundling results, and UTG has worked without the transport work, just playing the role of the operator of underground storage, of the independent operator. And I may say that for that part of our business, this year was incredibly successful. Several figures. The storage was at the level of 28.3 billion cubic meters, that is 91% out of the whole capacity of our underground storages. We were actively working on the increase and the growth of our client base and customer base. If we take 2020 only, we had the growth of 30% and achieved the number of 848 customers who entrusted us to store their natural gas in the Ukrainian underground storages. And also I'd like to emphasize the increase of the number of non-residents. It grew for almost doubled. As of the end of the year, it was 91 company. As of today, we have more than 100 of legal entities, 104 in fact. And as of the end of 2020, those non-resident companies represented 24 countries of the world. And also we provided the increase of the amount of the weighted tariffs for the underground storage of natural gas, but the increase was done in the way for the tariffs for the Ukrainian PSGs would be still attractive in comparison with the tariffs by our neighboring countries. Very powerful work was done by the service of the natural gas in the mode of warehouse, customs warehouse, and also with the tariff of short haul. This is the product of GTS operator, but lots of our customers came just to have this mode, either customs warehouse or short haul tariff. We were working on the optimization of the managerial processes, we were thoroughly calculating our expenses, and also we got the first tranche of the corporate rights payments, which we had to get according to the results of the unbundling as 3.85 billion hryvnia. The next slide, please. So, which factors were negatively impacting our activity last year? First of all, after the unbundling, the pure revenue of UTG as the operator of PSG, when we didn't have the transit, its profit went down for 8 times. It's very substantial. The debitor's debt, which was told in lots of details by Peter Van Driel, which was done because of the necessity to form the reserve of the doubtful debts, because some of them are not paying for the gas, and the balancing services which they got achieved 51 billion. 44 billion of which is the debt, not paid debt of the operators of gas distribution, which were done during the process of, or during the years of 2016-19. Those are the negative factors which really made the efficiency of our work harder. The next slide, please. But if we come back to the financial results, and this is the topic of our conversation today, let us look at which outcomes Transgas achieved in 2020. Yes, unfortunately, we got the loss of 2.6 billion hryvnia, but this is the expense which is 9 times lower in comparison of the result of the last year. Look at the financial result of 2017, almost 25, 2018, 32, in 2019, 23, and in 2020, 2.6. Could we be profitable? Yes, of course we could, and this loss was done because this expenditure because we are a very conscious implementer of all of the verdicts, and according to this decision, we had the volumes of natural gas given, which led to those expenditure of 2.6. In other case, UTG would finalize the 2020 as a profitable company. So, please pay attention, we have a substantial improvement of the financial results, 9 times better, having the pure revenue after the unbundling, which went down as well. So, just pay your attention. Approximately 50 billion hryvnia was for the last 3 years. The results of the 2020 is the decrease of 8 times. And even looking at such a decrease of the profit part, the company managed to achieve much better financial results. The next slide, please. Several figures for those who follow the natural gas market, maybe they know them already. Some of the records which took place last year and the last heating season. During the 10 years, the maximum level of the filling of Ukrainian underground storage is 28.3 billion, that is plus 30%, 11.1 of which were stored in the mode of customs warfare, 6 billion and 100 million were pumped with the help of short-haul tariff, which was really well working paired with the customs warehouse. So the profit from the storage in 2020 by the non-residents is 300% in comparison with the overall decrease among the residents. So look, 5.1 billion is the pure revenue from the underground storage of natural gas services. In comparison with the previous period, it increased for almost 60%. So we can see a really positive dynamic on the non-resident companies, on the customers of natural gas. The increase for 442%, for 20% we can see the increase of the profits on the companies which are residents, but 442% of the increase on the foreign companies is a very nice signal, because we are the independent operator now of the underground storage, so we deserve for trust, and we are trying to be as much reliable and comfortable, convenient partner for our customer as possible. The next slide, please. So, as I'm out of slides, I do hope that I stuck to the time limit which I got from the hostess. I thank you for your attention and for the interest to our work. Thank you, Mr. Sergey. We were planning to finalize the main part of the speeches up to 5 p.m., but we have a very important speaker with an important message, that is Yaroslav Tekluk, the Director on Legal Issues of Nafta Gas, and he is the member of the Supervisory Board of Ukernafta. So we would like to listen to Mr. Yaroslav for him to tell about the results of the work of Ukernafta and maybe any other issues which you consider to be important. Thank you, Olena. Good evening. Understanding the limit of the time, on the one hand, I'll try to be as short as possible. On the other hand, I will try to provide some of the main info why we are now speaking about Ukernafta, why Ukernafta is important, why this year was a nice one for Ukernafta, and why it was cool for Naftogaz, first of all, as the shareholder of Ukernafta. So what's Ukernafta for Naftogaz? Ukernafta is, on the one hand, is a valuable, on the other hand, is a complicated asset. First of all, a complicated one because we have the minority shareholder, which is a very complicated one. And this asset has a very long history of management, which was done not in the best way, not in the most efficient way. This asset, looking at its value during the last years, was substantially under the risk of being lost. It was a very substantial tax debt, mostly because of the high tax debt which was happening during the last years, and Ukernafta, in fact, could not cope with this tax debt. What is Ukernafta in the figures as of today? The pure revenue of PJSC Ukernafta was 4.3 billion hryvnia. In comparison with 2019, the net loss was 4.1 billion hryvnia. In 2020, net sales revenue increased compared to 2019 by 7.3 billion hryvnia. That is, in fact, 26% more, and was 35.5 billion hryvnia. Ukernafta topped the rating of the largest taxpayers in Ukraine, according to the publication of rating, business and official figures, according to the results of 2020. So Ukernafta paid a record of 47.5 billion hryvnia to the budgets of all levels, which were used to pay both tax liabilities, which existed as of the beginning of the year, and to repay the historical tax debt and accrued penalties. The current tax obligations were approximately 28.9 billion to the special fund of the state budget, which again, maybe those figures could be different. It could be worse, could be a bit better. We're speaking about the time when, on the one hand, the majority of the businesses were affected by the pandemic, the markets are narrowing, and looking at that, it seems to me that the indicators of Ukernafta, with which they finalized 2020, are totally satisfactory and maybe even fine. Now about the tax debt. Why is this issue so important, and why I'd like to drive their attention to it additionally? Both in 2020 and since the beginning of 2021, the substantial attention was paid to why it was done, how it was done, whether we needed to do it at all, and so on. We consider that it was what was done, in fact, on the one hand, is a huge achievement of NAK Naftogaz. It was a very complicated way, a very hard way, the way which in fact demonstrated the capability to work between two companies and also with the parliament and the cabinet of ministers. And this is the operation where everybody won. Because on the one hand, both Naftogaz and the state saved a very valuable asset of Ukernafta. On the other hand, we paid substantial money to the state budget. As the result of the transaction, we paid the tax debt of Ukernafta, which was 28.9 billion hryvnia, and additionally we paid 7.2 billion hryvnia. Those are the payments which, in fact, emerged. Those are the tax obligations which emerged because of the transactions and operations, and when we could pay the tax debt. For Naftogaz, it is important that, in fact, the part of this transaction, or I would even say the source for the paying of this tax debt, was the compensation which Naftogaz got from the state budget, from the government, for the special terms. Because on the one hand, we have the law on the market of natural gas, Article 18, which witnesses that the people who have special terms of payment have the right to get the reimbursement or compensation in case if in the result of these activities they did not get enough of compensation. But on the other hand, during a very long period of time, Naftogaz has conducted negotiations with the government. They sent the requirements and even had to begin the court procedures to make the government, first of all, define the methodology of the calculation of these compensation, and secondly, to find the sources of this compensation, and thirdly, to get the compensation as it is. Naftogaz got from the budget 32.2 billion hryvnia of compensation. That is important to understand that this is not the dotation from the state budget. This is the part of the expenditure. This was the compensation of the part of the expenditure which Naftogaz had, providing the special obligations. We're not saying, we are not calculating, while calculating the expenditure, the debt which exists for today for the Naftogaz from the heat companies or gas sales and supply companies. We are speaking about the nature of this compensation is a bit different. That is why, in our opinion, this transaction, what I'm speaking about, has provided some foundation or basis for the following efficient and, I would say, economically substantiated cooperation between Naftogaz and the government. And when I say the government, I'm speaking about the state authority, not like the shareholder of Naftogaz. Secondly, we showed that we can work under the complicated conditions and we are capable to take hard decisions, which is, as of today, a substantial step forward, because Naftogaz has vast experience when the government just avoided to take hard decisions. Considering the time limit, I think that I will finalize at least the main part of the presentation. I would be happy to answer the questions in case if there are any. So I do hope that the info which I gave is enough. Thank you so much. Let's come to the Q&A session. We've got lots of questions. We will try to stick to the time limit, but I would ask the speakers to be as short in their answers as possible. The first question from Interfax Ukraine. When does NAK plan to get to the market? And this is the question to Mr. Kobolev. So when does NAK is planning to get to the market to buy the gas for the pumping in? And do you plan to spend the money from the loan of the EBRD? The exit to the market was always the professional secret. We don't say about that not to impact the price for the market, and whether we buy the gas this summer is in fact an interesting question for us. An interesting one because the underground storage issue is really overloaded with gas from different private owners. It is overloaded with gas of the foreign companies. So if those companies are in the underground storage, then the functions to fill up the underground storage and to stick to the pressure of the winter period will be done by the market. If it's not done by the market, we'll have to go to the shareholder and to talk with him or her who does that. Theoretically, this is the function of the new operator of GTS. This is the system to balance the market of natural gas. Whether our underground storage in this situation can be our financial function or theirs, it will define whether we buy gas or not. Thank you, dear colleagues. I will tell you whose questions are the next for you to get ready. Now we'll have the question for Volodymyr Golnik, then Sergei Golovnyov, then Dmitro, and then Voloshina. Volodymyr Dolnik, you've got lots of questions. Would you please group them to have 3 at least? Because if we pose all the 8 of them, we don't have enough time. Would you turn on the mic? Well, let me ask one question only, because I already began to write to Mr. Otto Vatelander now about that. I will ask the question to Otto Vatelander and we will communicate with him and that's it. Volodymyr, but in Ukrainian, please, because then we'll have the mess with the languages. Okay, you are interpreted. Okay. So the question to Mr. Otto Vatelander. He said that the level of natural decrease of production was minus 1.2% in comparison with the previous year. But the last year, the natural decrease was 14%. If 14%, then there should be the natural decrease of the level of 12.8%. But today, just 3 hours ago, I posed the same question to Mr. Alexander Romanuk, and he said that the natural decrease is 9%. I don't know, I posed this question to everybody. So 9 or 20.8, this is a substantial difference. I'd like to understand what's the figure at some document or statement. Volodymyr, isn't 9% written in the chat? Didn't you have the answer of 9% in the chat? I didn't get the answer in the chat. No, you have the answer in the chat. The answer from Otto.
I can answer you as well.
Yeah, please.
Otto, please.
It is very straight. You asked the question in the overview of impact assessment as well. Our production that we sold in 2020 was 13.45 BCM. The production that we sold in 2019 was 13.62 BCM. The difference is 1.2%. Our gross decline rate is 9% before we would have done our activities. We compensated 8% of that 9% of decline, and as a consequence, we resulted only 1.2% of decline, losing from 13.62, achieving 13.45. Those are the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Does it mean that during the previous year you just recalculated this natural decrease? Because this is a substantial decrease. So as far as I understood, there will not be answer. Otto, is this the end of your speech?
Yes, I think we have answered the question. The decline in the last year was 1.2% net between 2019 and 2020. Let's just keep that in mind.
Okay, the next question From Sergei Golovnyov, business censor, to Andrei Kobolev. Do you know about the decision of the Cabinet of Ministers as for to stop or to go on with the PSO? Which consequences do you forecast if they stop the activities? As far as I understand, the acting plan is that since the 1st of May, the PSO won't be going on. The consequences of the stoppage are not that easy to foresee because we already have several heat companies coming to us with the proposal to produce gas at the commercial terms. On the other hand, we will get as soon as possible the explanation from the regulator that any heat company which has debts has the right to buy gas whenever, not only in the company where they have the debt. We are also insisting to have this important element of market character of the relations with the heat companies. We are not trying to keep the debts. We say that each of them has to get to the market and to buy whenever they want to. So in this situation, the heat companies will be able to get to the market and to buy gas. They don't have any restrictions. There is no PSO. They don't have obligations. So if they have some interesting proposition to buy according to the market price, we will sell gladly. If they buy at the market, it's also okay. This is the result we are awaiting for. Thank you. The question from Dmitry Koshovoi to Andrei Kobolev. How do you assess the current situation at the market of loans for Naftogaz? When do you as a company plan to get to the market, and what would be the proposal? I cannot comment when we are going to do that. I cannot do that. It's not the appropriate way. Though I will say my point that we consider now that the market loans for Naftogaz looks really positive and attractive. Okay, the question from Victoria Voloshina, Channel 5, two questions. First, why the annual and monthly tariff is higher than 6.99 for the cubic meter of gas, and how did you form this price? The annual price was formed in March. It was formed basing upon the forward indicators of the European gas market, which we recalculated into the Ukrainian market for the next year. As of the moment when we signed the main contracts and awarded them with the main gas sales who then sell it to the buyers who sell it to the population, we had this understanding as for the market price. After that, the price at the Ukrainian market really went up. As of today, it went down again substantially, so we are expecting for those deviations in the future, but as of the moment of the formation, this was the price we offered. And the second question from Victoria. Denis Shmigal at his page in Facebook wrote several hours ago, the government considers that Naftogaz and other companies will decrease the annual product for the summer. That's what you mentioned now. Will you reconsider the price, and which could be one? Could you make it more specific? Honestly speaking, I think that Mr. Prime Minister meant that because of the competition, the wish to take some share of the market, he is expecting for a certain decrease. So when it happens and whether it happens at all, it's not that easy to say, but it will depend on the competitive actions of all of the market participants. As for now, our price is not the lowest. There are at least two private suppliers who are in the table which provided the price cheaper. Of course, they are smaller than we don't understand who they are, but they exist. So this is the question of competition. One more question from Dmitry Koshovei. What's the state of the process of the separation of Ukernafta, of the split of Ukernafta? What are the results of the negotiations with the minorities about this issue? What could be the time constrictions and the stages of this process? Let me answer, because I'm dealing with those negotiations, and the head of the supervisory board, Mykola Hurlenko and Yaroslav Tekluk and Peter Mondril are doing that. So we need to define several aspects of this split. First of all, a very important aspect is what's the price we assess the gas to, which Naftogaz took during the previous periods. What was the price? And it's a very important one. Secondly, which target structure of the asset ownership we see, which are left after Ukernafta. There are several options in both cases. The negotiations are not that easy because they also have the position of the state as for the readiness to take decisions on the tax aspects. I do hope to finalize negotiations up till the end of the May. Thank you. The question from Sergei Golovnyov. Today there was the release of NAK Naftogaz, yesterday, Sergei, the release of Naftogaz, that Naftogaz Trading sent commercial proposals to 30 gas companies, but they don't have the conditions of the year package for the consumers. When did you send the proposals, and how many gas companies gave the proposals to buy gas up to the 25th of April? Honestly speaking, we conducted negotiations with gas companies at different stages. Those negotiations began realistically in January of the current year, after there were certain restrictions introduced for the price of 6.99, when there was the conversation about the year product to stabilize the price. Then we began the negotiations. Different gas companies came during different periods of time. As for now, I think that we're saying that we had at least several dozens of counteragents coming to us. They are in different processes of making deals, and depending on when we make a deal with them, the conditions can be different for each of them. Thank you. And they would like to ask the question about the oil pipelines. Volodymyr Dolnik from Outer Rynok. Volodymyr, would you turn on your mic? Maybe this is the question to Andrei Kobolev now. The company is now having, from the bureaucratic point of view, a very hard process to take over the control over the assets of Prikarbad-Zahid-Trans. This is the oil pipeline of the western direction on the territory of Ukraine. So its former financials who controlled that, they had really powerful political agreements with the owner of the resource, with Rosneft company. So do you conduct any negotiations with Rosneft? And what will Naftogaz do if Rosnafta doesn't want to deliver resource along the pipe, maybe to Belarusian resource? Could you make the additional load? What are the plans in the commercial? And a sub-question, do you have any plans on the construction of the oil product part for the 0 kilometer of Odessa-Brody in the southern part? And do you have any additional capacities to store oil products? Well, as for the oil pipeline, the process is really hard. The owner of the resource or the seller of the resource theoretically can be either Russia or Belarus. The negotiations are conducted, and there are no options to comment any alternative options. It wouldn't be appropriate to comment on them. I think that the political factor in these negotiations will be the only one which impacts a lot, though it is there, and to reassess the impact of certain political processes, especially as for Russian Federation. So as for the Odessa-Brody, we have several projects which are now considered within the division of oil, which are created to increase the economic efficiency of this business, and this one is one of them. Whether we launch it, well, I don't have the answer for this question so far. I do apologize, if I may. By the way, as for Naftogaz, rather often you speak about decarbonization, formally saying, or greening of your business, making it green. So the biggest grid in Ukraine is that. But in 7 years, we haven't seen any substantial changes on modernization of those grids. They're really losing a lot in comparison with the private companies in this market. Will you change the approaches to the methane retail? It will depend on the wish of the Ministry of Energy to give us what is not given for more than 10 years. This is the right of the ownership and the papers for the stations. We cannot invest into the objects which are not in our ownership, which we don't have the papers for, and which, I will repeat, are not given. Not a single minister has given it to us. Well, we can easily guess about the reason, but this is the sad fact. Thank you. We had the question, a very widely disseminated question from the Facebook readers under the broadcast about what's the sense for the customers to change the supply for the Nafta gas if the difference with the Firtash price is 3 capex? Andrei, could you answer this question? Well, first of all, 3 capex is money as well. But on the other hand, I'd like to say that as of today, the number of applications to Naftogaz to transfer has increased 6 times in comparison with the previous week. So this speed is increasing, and I think that it will be still supported at the high level because in spite of the difference in the price, we have a substantial difference in the quality of the services. And the transition to Naftogaz, especially for the customers who are using internet or using the grid of our agents, those are the banks and Ukrainian post office, they really feel some sense in that. Okay, the question from Igor Moskalevich. When will we have Stockholm on Ukernafta? Stockholm on Ukernafta? It seems to me it has taken place already? No? Well, it seems to me no, but still. What do you mean? Do you mean when the minority shareholders went to the court as for the Ukernafta through the Polish arbitration? But they had the decision in winter, and it was made public. The minority shareholders considered this proceeding in the court file. Well, as for the data from Igor, it was delayed. Well, as for winter, it was a big public news, if we're speaking about this Stockholm. That was the piece of news in winter that when the minority had this court file, so it was refused. It was not done. It was cancelled because of the formal reason that the lack of the jurisdiction. Yes, that's it. Okay, thank you. One more question from him. Recently, you've presented the plans up to 2030 with a deficit of $10 billion. What's the source? We presented them not with the deficit of 10 billion. We presented it with our assessment of the money which is needed to implement the projects in case of the successful exploration on the prospective production. So this is not the deficit, this is the need. Naftogaz has conducted negotiations with several bigger companies which invest actively into oil and gas all over the world. And you could read about them online. We wrote the memorandums. Those are the 3 companies. First, the Austrian company, and we then the Israel Nafta oil, and then Polish PG&G. And now we have the negotiations with the 4th biggest world grand about the possible cooperation with one of the most interesting projects on the production of natural gas. So we plan to involve the money of the partners. It's not appropriate to say that we are covering the deficit. We are optimizing the structure of the shareholder capital, and we also involve the competences and experience and other elements which can do our projects, to make them more successful than to do it only with our own efforts. So we plan to involve partners, to be short, but not to cover the deficit, but to optimize. Okay, we have the question from Vlad Krasinski from RBK, but it seems to me we already mentioned about it. Are there plans about Ukernafta and Kolomoisky? Do you have any? Yes, I've already answered. And the last question as of today, if we have enough time, then 2 questions, because we have 2 minutes left. The one before the last, Dmitro Koshevoy. When will we have the next payment of GTSU? If you mean the payment on the sales of shares from UTG for MGU, I don't know, because there is a very complicated discussion between us and the Ministry of Finance. In fact, it should take place as soon as possible during the next 2 months, according to the rules of the contract. So we do hope that MGU will stick to their obligations and the same will happen of the operator of the GDS. The clarification from Metro, he means the payment to Naftogaz, for Naftogaz. We consider the option when partially the sum is paid to the operator and the partially by MGU, but again, we do hope during the next 2 months. And what's the policy of Naftogaz about the free cash, considering that they're rather substantial? Which part of this liquidity Naftogaz takes in the bonds? Well, from time to time we do buy them. We provide the transactions with the papers of different turnover and duration and different currencies. So it's not easy for me to say which. We don't have this classical ratio, right? It's not easy for me to say the percent, but still, as of the previous year, we owned approximately 11 billion hryvnia. Now we don't own it, but still. We have 1 minute left. The last question. Volodymyr Dolnik, who is the most active participant of ours. Volodymyr, would you pose it and we'll finalize? It's a very short one. So, we're planning to involve neighbors and the second Canadian company for the negotiations to be involved. As far as I understand, all of that is closed, or still this process is ongoing of the negotiations. I will tell you instantly, this is not it. The negotiations are ongoing, and these negotiations are close to the awarding of the contract. As for Israeli Nafta, I asked my partners from Israeli. They said that Mr. Yusuf has never been the operator, this company. Did he come to Naftogaz, or Naftogaz found him as an investor? Just a detail to find it out. Honestly speaking, I don't know. I can't answer that because I haven't been involved at the stage of the search of this company. I was involved at the stage when we had the result. So who found whom, I don't even know. But the company is really owning a substantial financial resource which they used for the investments into oil and gas sphere. So of course they're interesting as investors. Dear colleagues, I do apologize if we didn't have enough time to answer some of the questions. I know there are some left, but we are out of time. I will only tell that the whole financial reporting of Naftogaz is uploaded to the website of Naftogaz. If you come to the website, you can see the press releases with the links for the financial reporting. This is the truthful reporting. You can totally use it. And tomorrow in the morning, we'll post the annual report of Naftogaz for the work of the previous year. Thank you so much for the participants. The record will be available in several hours in 2 languages. Thank you, dear speakers and journalists. Thank you, everyone, for the participants. Thank you for the attention. Goodbye. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.